All right, good afternoon. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Keras Circle. Keras Circle is a nonprofit programming arm of Keras Books. And Keras Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're also the proud bookstore host and school sponsor of Keras and Agnes Scott, which is a school store and partner for Agnes Scott College. Agnes Scott College is our partner in this event today, specifically the Department of Art and Art History, of which Nell Ruby is, of course, an active faculty member. And Nell Ruby is our conversation partner today. She's a Decatur-based artist, citizen, and teacher. 2021 marks her 25th year at Agnes Scott College as a professor of art and art history. In her artwork, she constructs houses where windows, doorways, and television screens sit in the liminal space between inside and outside, imposing questions about protection, isolation, and connection. Working fluidly between flat schematic drawing, projected filmic light, solid, translucent object, and even performance, Ruby's work engages the viewer in an unsettling dialogue about power and complicity. Ruby is interested in engaging a creative process to think through, envision, and produce images and objects that challenge and build culture. So when Nell Ruby said, hey, my friend Donna has this great book and project that I want y'all to know about, we were really excited about it, and we kept trying to think about when the best time to promote it would be. And then we thought, Women's History Month. This is an appropriate and interesting project to explore during Women's History Month. And so that is how we got to celebrating the Nun'S cell as mirrored memoir and metaphor in convent life, the study of the models of Nun'S cells from the collection of Tresors de Figure. I'm probably butchering that, my French is not so good. You'll correct this one. Came to be here. So we're going to hear a lot more from Donna Sadler, but I'm going to introduce you to Donna formally. Donna L. Sadler taught primarily at Agnes Scott College, and her research focuses on medieval art ranging from Rheims Cathedral to late medieval sculpture from the regions of Burgundy and Champagne. Her books include Reading the Reverse Facade of Rheims Cathedral, Royalty and Ritual in 13th Century France, Stone, Flesh, Spirit, the Entombment of Christ in late medieval Burgundy and Champagne, Touching the Passion, Seeing Late Medieval Altarpieces Through the Eyes of Faith, and the book we are here celebrating today, The Nun'S Cell. So we're going to hear lots more about this book, how it came to be, and we're going to see some images for y'all who are watching at home. Just know that in the final edit of this, you will get to see the images more up close. So we appreciate you kind of experiencing this as a little bit of a storytelling adventure. We know you can see the images, but not as clearly as you probably would like to. So just know that we'll be weaving those images back in the final cut of this, which will be up on our YouTube channel. But please put your hands together for Donna Sadler and Nell.
Well, thank you so much for being here, internal and external audiences. And I want to take a tiny moment during Women's History Month to shout out to Keras Books, who I have followed since I got here in 1990 when they were in other locations. I'm so pleased to have them connected to the college. We're right across the street. But I also want to say that Keras does programming like this. And ER is a bit of a mastermind, a bit of a smarty pants, a bit of a elegant, gracious host, sort of does a lot of things. But Keras, if you have any extra dollars, is a wonderful thing to donate to because their dollars go a really long way. And the kind of programming that they do, I believe, really makes systems change through education. And it is so broad reaching. So like, as we were setting up, ER told me that there was a tall person last night presenting on the book Broken, which is about child protective services. And then they also do, of course, medieval nuns. And then they also do things like The Black Girl Survives in This One horror stories. It's really creatively put together. So I just want to say thank you, ER, for all of yourself. Really, you really bring it to the job. It's a marvelous bookstore. So I want to introduce also Donna and me in a different way, which is just to say you know, Donna and I worked together. We lucky dogs got to work together for 25 or 30 or 100 years. And we have always connected in this way of our work. And, you know, you're going to hear about Donna's work right now, but there's something sort of about the ineffable that we both strive to understand and we both clearly see and experience. So in my work, which I'll show, what's going to happen next is Donna's going to kind of give you context for the book, give you some images, and talk a little bit about what she did, which is just the coolest project, and how you got there, I hope, like how you found them. And at the end, I'm going to just show some reflections like a responder would of not a lot of my work, a few things, but also sort of some popular culture items that I think really relate, and invite you to ask questions and give comments as well. Yeah, so we're speaking together because we have a really cool friendship and I think close kind of creative scholarly kinship. So I'm going to let Donna tell you about her book.
Thank you, Nell. Thank you, ER. This is the most unusual friendship ever. I'm a medieval person and I relate more to Nell's contemporary artwork than anything. And so we have had conversations over the years that have brought us together, but also have brought our work together. So the book that I've just published about these nun cells concerns a body of work of 350 miniature nun cells, which were created in the 18th through the early 20th centuries. They belong in a private collection that belongs to a doctor who lives in Chalon-sur-Saône in Burgundy. And he collects these works because he's very Catholic and he thinks of these as deeply religious works of art. And his the works were made by over 14 different orders of nuns. And they created them, we think, as souvenirs for their families, because once the nuns professed their solemn vows, they were not allowed to see their families after that. So it was a souvenir of their lives to give to their families, a sort of proxy of their role as daughter or sister for the families. Could I have the first? And so I'm just going to show you some images of these cells because they're, I think they're amazingly charming. And I want to talk about my approach to them. First of all, my goal in this book was to contextualize these cells and see how they work in terms of the discourse of gender, of identity, of self-representation, of monastic devotion, because I think these works were made in the spirit of devotion. Each nun spent an hour a day working at her handicraft, because the Virgin Mary, who was the prototype for all nuns, did sewing, embroidery, and weaving. And so each nun imitated the Virgin Mary in her own life. Her cell, if I could have the next detail, contained a certain number of fixed items, naturally a bed, a table, writing implements, usually a basket of handiwork, sewing, embroidery. It also had a holy water dispenser, a crucifix, possibly a Virgin and Child. The next, please. And so everything was prescribed by the specific order of the nun. But I also look at these as a type of memoir, which seems illogical because all these nuns belong to communities, they belong to a collective. But in my research, I found that identity is really contingent upon community, so that there are only a certain number of cultural scripts that are available for people to sort of be embedded in. And that identity is formed both by personal memories and collective memories, so that the commonalities that these cells share really are unavoidable because they only have a certain number of scripts to buy into. But the personal touches, I think, as you'll see, do come through. Could I have the next, please? So each of the cells are obeying the dictates of their specific order, and they vary in terms of quality. So each of these nuns is approaching her cell as a form of imitating Christ in the sense that his suffering, they wanted to suffer themselves as much as possible. The cell in the convent was the only private space the nun had. Everything else was communal. For example, there was a communal closet in which their spare habits, their shoes, everything was stored. And their shoes weren't even divided between left and right. This has always bothered me. But you would just go and get a pair of shoes, and so that the Mother Superior would go into the nun cells 3 times a year in order to make sure that nothing from the outside world had come into the nun cells. There was not, private property was forbidden. So that what they do display is kind of what they do with the property that they were allowed. Could I have the next, please? They are usually portrayed in an act of devotion or displaying some handiwork, either on their bed or beside their chair of what they've done. And I think of these works as being curated by the individual nuns. They're rehearsing how they want to be seen by the outside world. And they're all fronted by a piece of glass. So it's literally a nun's life under glass, and we're looking in on them. And even though the audience for these is quite small, i.e. their families, it was very much just sort of a vignette that's captured in time. And I think what's so special about this is the use of the miniature scale, because the miniature scale enlarges us as viewers. The whole comes before the parts. We see everything at a glance, and it makes gods of us all. And this dynamic is what one scholar calls an intimate immensity. It condenses and intensifies the viewer by looking at this whole. It also intensifies and enriches the individual by the sort of detail that's rendered in these individual cells. Could I have the next, please? And in so doing, gives us a privileged path of access to the past. In other words, we can do history by looking at these cells. And so we actually can look at an 18th or 19th century nun cells and imagine in a very visceral way what the life of a nun was actually like. What happened in a nun's cell is also very important, because once she crossed the threshold of her cell, she was to engage in a mystic union with the bridegroom, which was Christ. So what happened in the cell was she was visited mystically by Christ, and she would touch the side wound, and that was the portal of salvation. And by touching that wound, she entered into this relationship of bride and bridegroom. All nuns were considered brides of Christ. And this was a sort of recapitulation of the Annunciation to Mary of the incarnation of Christ, which I'll show you in a little bit. Can I have the next, please? Let's see, is that an Annunciation? No, okay, no, it's not. I'm looking at it totally. This is actually the cell of a Carodian. A Carodian is a wealthy widow who, upon the death of her husband, would join a convent, and she got to bring all her material wealth into the convent. So notice how she has a silk habit and her bed is adorned with a silk canopy. She would pray with the sisters and benefit from their prayers for her. But, she was sort of a special category. Now, the next. So this is a cell of the Carmelites. Some of the cells are very similar in character. The Carmelites, they were big on spinning wool. So there's lots of, wool spinning in the Carmelite cells. Next. So what can we compare these nun cells to? In the 17th century, aristocratic men would have cabinets of curiosity. They would collect shells or gems or precious objects. And these objects would be signifiers of themselves. They would tell their history through these cabinets. And these were the precursors of contemporary museums. In fact, many cabinets of curiosities feed into museums. The one in Vienna, the one in Amsterdam, are all based on private collections. And so the idea that objects actually betray the identity of the individual, I think comes into play very much in these cells. My approach to these cells is using material culture. In other words, nuns make things and things make nuns. And it turns out that the objects in a domestic setting, and in this case, in the nun cells, excuse me, would be very much sort of signifying the identity of the nuns. Excuse me. Good on to next. Another common sort of miniature object would be a dollhouse. And in the 17th century, dollhouses were owned by wealthy women, and they were not for young girls. They were for women who would present them to their neighbors in order to show off what they couldn't afford in their own homes. So this dollhouse has a china set of 205 pieces, and it was sort of to show off, to the Joneses what she could afford in her dollhouse. And it wasn't for play, it was for, upward mobility. And so it's interesting that this too was for performing, her identity in the guise of the dollhouse. So I just wanted to show you some more examples to get a feeling for this genre. The wealth of the nun is usually detected by the numbers of saint images she has on the walls. The next. This is one of my favorites because here we seem to have interrupted the cell of Saint or Sister Adelaide. She's reading a book, but she looks up to catch the viewer's eye. She not only has a footstool, but she has a foot warmer. On her personal altar, you can see a porcelain cup. You know, she's made it. She's kind of ruling the roost in her convent. But there's something so winning about her. And her, you know, again, although people might take issue with me calling these a type of memoir, I think something very individual comes through in this image. Next. And this was a sister who was in charge of flower arranging for her convent, and maybe for her convert too. And so you see her flowers very prominently displayed. Next. So this is a cell of a Capuchin nun, and what you notice is that there are inscriptions on the wall, and I just wanted to read you what they are. Oh, my cell, my only bliss, all my happiness is God alone. Oh, the sanctity of being a religious cell of a humble and very poor Capuchin. So each of the rooms has etiquettes written on the wall, and they're very self-effacing. It was almost a contest to see who was poorer or more obedient or more chaste. Next. Gotta love this one. Very small, and it comes with its own carrying case. And what I love about it is that her shoes are on the outside of the cell. You know, it's just like she knows how to work the cell thing. Next. This was a really important find. This was found in a convent in Bone, and it's a box of supplies used for making cells. Could I have the next? And inside, one finds pictures of all the saints, as well as a little chair, as well as the sticks for making more chairs. So this is like the hobby house. And you get a sense that all these nuns are sitting cheek by jowl, making in silence these cells in order to give to their family. Next. This is an incredibly important find. It's a whole convent, and it was found in southern France. And we're looking at the right at the archivist. She even has glasses. Next. The outside, each of the cells is named after a saint. Next. Here we find the nurse bringing supplies to an infirm sister. Next. The bell ringer and a list of the chores for each sister for the day. Next. A view of the cloister. Next. The convent kitty. Next. This is a chicken egg with a nun's cell inside. And on the back is a return address. It says, sent by the Mother Marie of the Convent of Tranche. And it defies belief, but there it is. Next. This probably was the cell of an anchorite, a nun who had died in God's eyes and was born again in faith. She was living in a rock-cut cave. Next. The interior of her cell. Next. This is a walnut. And the walnut on the left has the relics of saints, and on the right, an interior of a cell. Next. The interior of the cell. There are numerous walnut shells and eggs. Next. A duck egg and its two ends. Next. Saint Teresa of Avila. Next. Saint John. Next. A Visitantine cell. Next. Just a detail of the icons, which are framed in silver. Next. This is the Annunciation to the Virgin, which each of these cells is an invitation of. Next. This is the cell of a nun who has just experienced her mystic marriage with Christ. Next. The back. Next. This is the death of Saint Teresa. Next. A detail. Next. No, I just have to stop here. This is a Cistercian nun. And notice her bedding, those two plump pillows, the absolute, intense attention to comfort. Next. But on that bed, we find her metal girdle and her metal flagellant withs. And the metal girdle, the tines are all turned inward. There's a little contradiction in terms here, but okay, next. I think I'm almost done. The Dominicans did not make cells, and this is why. This is not a good cell. It's like, this would be the cell that I would make if I were a nun. So there's a little problem. Okay, I think I have one last one. Oh, the Ursulines. This is a novice being approved by the Mother Superior. Their faces are porcelain. And this is a mystic marriage. And then I think, and then there's one last one, are the 20th century. Oh, next one.
This is the Carmelite nun.
Yeah, sorry.
One more after that.
Yes, please.
There we go.
Oh, okay, so this is another Herodian. I call her La-di-da. She brought everything she owned with her, and she's dressed in the draperies, and she just is, all fit for, everyone's prayers, finally. Oh, okay, there are dolls. Remembering that the women who entered these convents could be between the ages of 6 and 11. And even though these dolls could be used pedagogically to show what a Dominican habit was like, they also could have been used to play with. Another doll, next one. And she's making flowers. Next. Guess I had too many slides. Next. Oh no, okay, could you go back? Sorry. Okay, this is you.
Okay. Thank you, Donna. I mean, I think you guys get such a sense of the stories that happen. And I want to just point out Donna's language. It's just, I always get lost in what she writes and how she speaks and her stories. I mean, I think that's what's made her such a successful instructor and instructor in life. One of the things that I really love about these is the idea of how they tell history, how they are a memoir, because the first thing that happens to me is my relationship to them. I'm like, oh, that's what they were like. Oh my God, I'm like that. It's like, that's how I relate to things, is how is that affecting me? Because, it's all about me. So the first thing I wanted to talk about in putting these two together is the idea, and Donna talked about intimate immensity. What a beautiful phrase. And it comes from a theory, which is the metaphysics of the miniature. Who knew, right? But my work, just to put it a little bit in context, it's always been huge. I mean, I've been like, you walk into it and it has its forceful effect on you because you're in it, right? But what I've done recently is gone very, very small, and my cells actually look very similar. My houses look very similar, and they're similar in scale to these. And what I find is that they do that thing where you look into them and you're by yourself looking into them. You're not with other people. You can only have a private experience, and you can't help but imagine yourself in that. You're also doing it voluntarily, right? So you're complicit in this looking. And so you go in and you're like, okay, it's just me and me in here, what's going to happen? But it allows you this infinite sort of internal dialogue. You can take that wherever you want to. So it's sort of a meditational space. And I think good art does that. It puts you in kind of this sublime, and my art's good. It puts you in this sublime discourse with yourself, right? It takes you somewhere else. It doesn't just tell you anything. It asks of you. And I think these do that in that way, that they connect me with, the 1800s, 1700s, and they connect me with, Carmelite nuns, which I have no connection. Something I want to say too is that both Donna and I, neither of us are of this faith. So I just wanted to talk about scale and how that makes, the metaphysics of the miniature. I wonder if you want to talk about that the idea of getting this key ring from the Eiffel Tower is actually more important than seeing the Eiffel Tower itself. That's what you're talking about. Is that right? Yeah.
Well, could you do the next one? Let's show
Yep.
the Eiffel Tower. Yeah, the next
Oh,
one.
I thought that was the next one. What was I showing?
Hands.
We're not to Eiffel Tower yet. Let's see.
I saw it somewhere. No, they got out of order.
Oh, they got out of order. Yeah. Find the Eiffel Tower if you can. Shoot.
That's
I
fine.
didn't see it.
Yeah,
Is
yeah, I see it.
Is that it right there? No, it's right there. Is that a cue? 52?
Yeah.
No,
No,
the
that's-
52 is the mortification.
Oh, never mind.
Okay.
Well, the Eiffel
Yeah.
Tower, the souvenir, you get the aura of this monument. And the interesting thing about the miniature is that it's both microscopic and macroscopic. And you can't get it all in.
Right. So the slide that's not there is a comparison of an Eiffel Tower keyring, the souvenir, which is one of the words that you used, and the walnut. The thing that there's so much within it. So there's so much within that scale because it's that scale. So that was really what I was wanting to talk about. We can stay here. It doesn't really matter where we go. So this is on the left is the close-up of the implements of torture.
Self-mortification.
Sorry, self-mortification. And on the right is just the caption was there, but it's like Jane's doll nurse set or something like that. It's a Barbie type toy. And so I was just going to talk about the idea of the particular and how we come to play with, as an adult, the self-mortification implements we make to create a thing, to go back to thingness, to have something that is tangible, that we can relate to ourselves, and that we have this need and desire to play, and that brings us into again that sense of exploration and getting to know ourselves. And I was just going to say that we like those particular things, and I don't know if the dolls' toys are that far from self-mortification. You can go to any next one if you want to say anything about Yeah. And so then I was just gonna talk about the carrying case idea, you know, it's just something we like. We like to have that. They're small, you can take them with you. They're like talisman, like, you know, that I have this whole case of my life right here. You know, when I saw the Barbie movie, probably some of you have had this experience, but when I saw that Barbie movie and the Barbie things, the camper and the house and the toaster were life size, it kind of flipped me out because I was so intimately connected with those things. You know, I had those things, but that was my world. And to see them big, actually, it had a physical effect on me. So I just want to go back to the idea of, you know, we approach everything we encounter with our own experience of it. So to have the tangible puts us into the tangible world and puts me into the tangible world of the nuns. You know, there's an experiential component to that that's super strong. So objects and thingness. Yeah, we can go to the next one. And this is about frames, Donna. So my work on the left here is, on the right is glass houses and paper and rock. My essentialness has become about kind of light and elements. And then I juxtapose it with the nun in the very tight cell because it becomes framed. I wonder if you could talk a minute about frames.
I would love to talk about frames. One of the things that happens when something is in frame is that it takes us out of space and time. Time is suspended and we enter into a state of reverie, not unlike prayer. And what your work always does for me is it totally suspends disbelief and I enter into whatever you're selling. And I do the same with these nun cells. They transport me. I think they're transcendent.
I hear that. I mean, I think that's right. And I think if you could find that one that had the mantelpiece again, and then you might not be able to, but the idea of, yeah, that top row is my mantle. So I collect these figures, and they're not just any figure. They're a figure that are made with this beguiling charm, right? They're not made self-consciously as art, right? They're just, I love the idea that they are in a way memoirs, they are in a way self-identity, and you can't see them very closely, but I just have this collection of things that have been imbued with kind of this intense dearness of, I don't know, letting go. Like there's something about that invitation into there's something else going on here, and it's not manufactured, it's not performed by the, you know, the culture's Mattel, right? It is really specific, and it's bringing into it somebody's self. I love that, and that we all collect. You know, we love that kind of thing. Yeah. Frames. So framing. I mean, I create windows and doorways and, you know, place boundaries basically, but they never keep you in. They always kind of draw you into another space. And I do that abstractly. And I think it is the abstraction that is compelling because, again, it's this idea of I'm inviting you into what we were just talking about is like the ineffable. Like there's something here, but I don't know what it is. And I think that nuns do that too, that they're their guilelessness, you know.
I think that crossing of the threshold, that liminality, you enter into their world and you become immersed in that world. And that immersion is what allows you to feel the nun's reality, to experience her. It lets you identify with what a monastic vocation is, even if you're as far removed as you and I are.
Right, and there was something that you had assigned that was, not to me, but a reading that, probably a paper you wrote, about the agency that you're given as this person who approaches you set the frame, but it's your choice to look at it. Right? It's your choice to immerse yourself in it. And so once you've decided, okay, I'm committing, I'm going into this frame, then it's yours, it's all yours, and you get to do with it, what you will, and we get to suggest. And I think that suggestion of the cell, is that I'm looking there, I'm like, oh, what does that give me? What does that remind me of? And I am there, just like you're saying, it's agency. Yeah. So those are thoughts that I have. The other one was about performance. There's a slide in here, and I'll just tell you about it. It's my students had just created maquettes of their bedrooms, their childhood bedrooms, and they look so much like these cells. It's kind of it's surprising, and there's something about the memory and them going back to that and thinking about that, and again coming to something like this, a child's sensibility, the idea of making something and just using sticks and stones and whatever's around it, forming something, but with an adult's maturity, right? So, the implements of torture are like a twisted take on that, but that was her reality, So that kind of kindergarten sense of playfulness, and as a person of consciousness and thought and personhood, that's something I really love, and I feel like it's so accessible. So,
Well, one of the things about miniatures is they take us back to our childhood where one's a miniature adult. And that inspires nostalgia. And that's why a Paris Eiffel Tower keychain can bring back Paris. And it's that nostalgia because it evokes memories, it triggers memories. And I think the miniature scale is wonderful for doing that.
It can't help but take you in.
Yeah. Do you all have any questions?
I do. I have a two-part question, actually. Oh, one second.
So we gotta make sure everybody can hear you.
I'm sure I have a loud voice. I would teach you a voice. But at what point of their life in the convent did they build these? And the second part is, were they each required to make them, or was it a choice or an option on their part?
Thank you.
That's what I wondered when I was reading it.
Thank you, Deb. The beauty of this project is there is nothing written about this. So I got to make up everything. And the only reason I say they were made for the families is because they were found in attics and basements. Because during the revolution, all the convents were shut. They were closed. They were destroyed. And so the collector, whose collection I worked on, he found his first nun cell in his attic. His grandmother was a nun. And so that's the evidence we have, that they were given when the novice turned into a professed nun.
So it might have been something she did as a novice. That was part of her training or her requirement to graduate into
Right.
full.
Or from postulate to novice. In other words, it's some rite of passage.
And then my other question is, the book said that many of these dolls were made of breadcrumbs. And I just thought, well, first of all, where are they all collected now? And how did the breadcrumbs stay preserved?
They use egg yolk to keep the breadcrumbs together, and most of the faces and appendages are made out of breadcrumbs, which is just amazing. And that they have lasted, it's amazing. And they're all in this one doctor's closet. They are not archivally preserved. That they have lasted this long is a miracle. And I don't know what will happen to them when he dies.
Well, your book will make somebody collect them and preserve them and put them in a museum. They need to be in a museum. They are just amazing.
Just a couple things. As a printmaker, I'm interested in the images that they have on the cell walls. Are those engravings like that you would get when you did a pilgrimage, or were they printed especially for the nuns to use, or do we know anything about that?
They were saints, they were prints of saints that were given to the nuns for their individual worship.
Okay.
And then they would take those and make them an adornment for their miniature cells.
Because they look like something you could just hold in your
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is for Nell, I just recently posted that piece you made it's a night light where you have it's a clay piece that has the interior and there's a TV in it. And then there's a night light that's hooked into the TV. So you plug it in and the light comes out. So I was thinking about, and it's right in my kitchen. So I enter that space because of the way your work is, you enter it, but at the same time, it comes out, it lights my space, and it's very interesting, that kind of back and forth that happens because it's a night light. So I come into the space at night and it's filling it's something to think about as you move
Yeah,
forward.
I love that. I love the idea too, that when I work with light, that it's really different depending on the time of day, and actually dynamic all the time, right? Because the light's always changing, so it's relative to light, and that changes the mood and just all that kind of stuff. And that's a cool thought.
And just one last thing, when I was a girl, we didn't have Barbies or anything because my parents just didn't, but we had our own doll houses that we made from cardboard boxes, and everything was out of scale because it was whatever we could find. And I still remember just the joy of playing up in the attic with our doll houses. It was just wonderful.
I did that too with cigar boxes.
Yeah.
I cut out the ads and put it's nodding.
Hi, Donna. My name's Natalie Villacorta. I'm new to the English department at Agnes. I don't think we've met before, but I'm a memoirist, and so I like thinking about these as memoir. And I'm interested in the idea that the nuns. I also write about nuns, which is part of the reason why I'm here. But I'm interested in the idea that the nuns made these for their families, because when I think about the purpose of writing memoir, I think it often is about yourself. You're writing the story for yourself because you need to externalize your experiences and what has happened to you in order to move on from them, to heal, to like build your identity, right? You often think about like writing memoir as the construction of a self. So I think I was just thinking like about maybe these nuns making these for themselves, that it is sort of like an essential step in taking that final plunge to the professed vows, like having to really look at your life as a nun and be able to kind of accept it. And also just because I'm thinking like making these really reminds me of something childish, something girlish, right? Playing with dolls, right? Like it's almost, as you were saying, dolls, miniature things are a way of accessing nostalgia for our childhood. Like this is a way for the nuns to be girls again. It's a way for them to like have playfulness and fun in a life that is really lacking a lot of fun.
Right.
So I don't know, I guess that's more of a comment than a question, but yeah, because I think you said that there's nothing written on these, but I was really curious like how these cells were received by the families. Did the families even want these? Like, is it comforting to be reminded that your daughter and family member is now confined in this space? And was it really more for the nuns themselves?
Those are all very good questions, comments, because nuns were not individuals, they were communal, so their identity is double. And so by making this, cell, are they proclaiming, are they putting a stake in the ground here saying, this is me, can you hear me? And so there's no way to know how they were received. In the book, I talk about them as the absent presence of the daughter or the sister. But the other possibility is that they were given to a benefactor who was helping a convent as a sort of, a bid for more funds. Or they would have been given to a niece to kind of encourage her to enter the convent. But to be given to the family just as a place marker, whether it's a positive statement or a negative statement, these are all open questions. Because so many of these nuns were forced into the convent. It was usually the least good-looking sister, the younger sister, the sister who was in some way challenged physically or mentally, that got put in a convent. This was not a positive or willing choice in many cases. So, that also casts a different light on the cells.
And were they only in France? Is it only French?
Mostly French. There's a couple in Spain, a couple in Savoy, one in Bavaria, but mostly France.
I was wondering, I'm always fascinated when you look at history and you see things that feel so contemporary in terms of communication. Like the memification of these houses, these cells, they feel to me like TikTok trends. Like the fact that these young women are expressing themselves in ways that are iterative of each other, but also so like they're cohering in ways that are legible to each other, right?
Right.
And they're referring to this one painting, and everyone knows that they're referring to this one painting across regions and across, with very little. People are not even sending letters that fast, So it's like, how does that virality occur? And it made me think about right now on TikTok there are all of these Mormon kind of young women who are, showing like trad wife trends to try and sort of backdoor convert young women to Mormonism. And I was thinking about that, that it feels more like almost a weird proselytizing tool for young nieces than it does. I mean, I understand why you draw the conclusions you draw, but linking it to contemporary things, it's like, I'm going to show you my humility. I'm going to show you, I'm not like other girls. I wear long skirts and I do farm work, and isn't this wonderful to have a husband that takes care of me? That's the contemporary version of it. And I was thinking about the sort of showing off about your humility and your chastity and your frugality and all those things. It feels very similar,
Yeah.
But TikTok is easy, and this takes so much, like the virality of that feels almost impossible. So I'm curious about how you think those things, how that information got transmitted from place to place.
I don't think it did. I think each of these convents had what was known as an institutione, which was the book of rules. And that book of rules said how big the beds were to be, how tall the chair was, exactly a list of the contents of each cell. The fact that this was done, I think, as an act of devotion, just was something that perhaps their confessors imposed upon them. And that was the one male present in each convent. And that it was a tradition, for example, that the Dominicans didn't pick up on for lack of talent. But that other convents did. So I think their universality is at war with their particularity. I can't say, but do you know what I mean? I think that some are very individualized, but the Franciscans and the Capuchins are almost cookie cutter alike.
I'm interested though in that idea of performing your identity. You know, that's what social media does, you know, that whole kind of, I'm having such trouble with it, I think. But that this becomes a performance both in the particularizing and also possibly in the collecting, right? Like where do you put, does the family put it on the mantle or is it in the attic, you know? Like, is it a showpiece? And I'm talking about, you know, I'm pious because my daughter, I've given, you know, my daughter has done this. Or is it just a thing that is just a thing? You know, who's performing and who's performing what? Just those ideas of self-performance and identity.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting is the collection has grown by 1/3 since the pandemic because French people have been cleaning out their attics and basements. And that makes me so happy.
Does the church have any interest in this history at all? No.
No.
I'm Catholic, that doesn't surprise me. But that's such a shame. I mean, it feels like such a travesty to not be interested. Yeah.
You told me about how regimented their lives were, and of course they were every day. Every day it was vespers, it was compline, it was all these stations or orders that they had to perform, and even down to the size of their beds. Everything was regimented and controlled. And I wonder, I read somewhere a long time ago that people who enjoy miniatures enjoy exerting control over a life that's a little chaotic. You can set some kind of order into it, and I wonder if that relates at all to this. When my daughter and I were playing with her dollhouse, I found it very comforting.
Yeah.
In the midst of a toddler and a preschooler who were just sometimes on my last nerve, it's like, oh yes, we can go to this tiny place where I can put this right here and it's just perfect. So I wonder if there's any of that here.
Oh, I love that.
Me too.
I just love that.
The comfort of play, you know, the comfort of,
Yeah.
I mean, I get that too. Like sometimes I don't want to hang out with the adults. I want to hang out with the 3-year-olds because they're just, there we are. You know, there's nothing that I have to, there's no expectation.
Hi, my name is Matthew. I'm struck by the reception of this as being something intimate and then becoming something anonymous, where it is my Aunt Donna in her nun cell and then a nun in the nun cell. And that's something facilitated by the long arc of time in which you've collected. And you've drawn a lot of parallels now, and I'm wondering how that manifests in the work that you studied and in the art that you've created, how things transition from a reception that is intimate to a reception that is anonymous and takes on the expression of a much larger experience beyond just the specific. Does that make sense? Yeah, good question.
When I started my work, all my work is really the same thing over and over and over again. But when I started it, it was 1982. I did a play series and it had the windows in them, but they were about my mother-in-law, my former mother-in-law. And it was, and Olga had a lot of desire for me that I wasn't performing in the way that a daughter-in-law should. Anyway, I made these things and they had giant noses coming through and mouths. There was always a TV, and there's the idea that the TV is this buzz of what the culture's telling us, but it was very specific for me. You know, it was this woman and I couldn't understand what I wasn't doing right, and I clearly wasn't doing it right. And then it definitely has morphed into, you know, everybody has that. Everybody has their voices that are telling them what they're supposed to do, and they're all their own voices. You know, my father died recently, and it was astonishing to me how much of his voice I discovered after he was gone. It's like, oh, I don't have to think about that anymore. You know, it was like these weird freedoms that I had no idea about. So my work has now come to this notion of kind of, how can I make it so that we can all kind of discover ourselves? I'm going to make this moment and just let you know that there's something going on here. Thank you for that question. It's lovely. We're probably done.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to wrap up. Thank you all so much for being here. I really do think this is a great women's history event because, you know, the echoes across time really matter. I think we can get really bogged down in the specifics of our current moment and, like, you know, why we have so much trouble with social media. You know, like we the immensity of the scale of things and how small we can feel. But I think there's a real value in feeling small, like what you're talking about, the human scale of things, feeling small across time, feeling small geographically, feeling small in these miniatures. So I think it's really helpful to look at these things and remember our place.
I want to make one point about that, which is I think the local global place that this space is, that it really does all that. It kind of reaches back, reaches forward, reaches out, and it's right here. Really nice.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. So Donna's book is sort of geared towards the academic market, but Donna has a copy to show if folks just want to look at it. We can special order it, but it's not sort of at a trade price. So come talk to me if you're interested in
But
it.
it's worth it.
Totally worth it. But it's really more for the serious collector. It's just what I would say, or for the librarian. We're going to, of course, Agnes Scott, librarians and all that. If you are someone who works in an academic library, or has a more official curatorial role, come talk to me. We'll help you figure out how to get it. But otherwise, hang out. Congratulate Donna, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for being with us.
I'm Sarah. I'm just a random person from